What is up, everybody, and get ready for one hell of a nostalgic trip back to the 90s and a little tiny vacation in the 80s as well. So this is this month's Patreon pick video. If you don't know what that is, I have my members over on Patreon. The link is in the video description below, which is my crowdfunding source. These are the people that love my channel and want to contribute to it financially. And one of the perks that I give them in exchange for their financial support is that I let them every single month vote on a video idea. And this month they chose top movies from my childhood. Now, this was going to be a top 25. But I just kept adding movies that I kept thinking of ones that really make me think of my childhood, ones that I love, ones that I never get to talk about, that I was excited to talk about. And I almost went all the way to 50, but I figured, you know what, let's stop at 35. I'm about to turn 35 in January. And since we're talking about my childhood, 35 seemed like a nice round number. We got a lot of movies here, predominantly from the 90s. The 90s is going to dominate this list because that is when I grew up. I was born in 1990. But there are a few 80s movies in here that mean a lot to me. Now, as far as how I went about this list, now, a number of you guys know that I was watching rated R action movies and horror movies and things like that way back in my childhood too. So a number of those are also movies from my childhood that I love. But since I talk about those movies all the time, I wanted to focus this list only on the kids' movies and the family movies and, you know, even kind of setting a few steps into like teenage movies of that era that I just never really get to talk about. So this video can actually stand out and be a little bit of a different discussion for a change. Also, with that being said, this was very difficult to rank because a lot of these movies, how do I rank how much I loved them as a kid? I kind of tried to rank them based off nostalgia, like the ones at the top are the ones that make me feel most nostalgic, the ones that most remind me of my childhood in the 90s, but all 35 of these movies I love. So for all intents and purposes, they're not really in any particular order. Coming in at number 35 for me is a movie called Explorers. It stars Ethan Hawke, it stars River Phoenix, and believe it or not, I saw this movie after I saw Training Day. So I was either 11 or 12 years old when I first saw this. It came on Disney Channel one night, and I was like, hey, is that the guy that I just saw, like, fuck up Denzel Washington? And it tells the story of these group of kids. River Phoenix plays like the egghead of them, and Ethan Hawke is the one with the imagination, where they basically get like this, almost like a premonition out of nowhere, like this fever dream that shows them these plans and these ideas, and they eventually build this little spaceship out of a tilt-a-whirl game from the carnival, and they go up into space and they start to hang out with these aliens. And so what I love about this film is the characters, first of all, but it's really all of the building of everything. I think the movie loses a bit of steam once they're actually in space, but when they're building things and they're figuring out all this scientific stuff and you have the clashing of personalities, and it's just a really fun movie that is very nostalgic to me because I remember watching Disney Channel. I remember seeing the commercial for this. I remember watching it going, oh my God, it's the kid from Stand By Me. It's the young version of that guy I just saw in Training Day. And it even has a girl from a movie that we're going to be talking about in a little bit, Can't Buy Me Love, in here. And so when I was a kid, I used to do that where I'd recognize people and I would watch the movie based off of the actors that I recognized. So this one's a fun one. It does remind me of my childhood, so I wanted to throw it on here. Coming at number 34 might surprise some people that it's low, but remember, I said it's not really much of an order, so don't get too pissy about it. The Goonies. The Goonies is a movie that I've always loved. It's a movie that I have watched numerous times throughout my life. I've introduced my kids to it and we've watched it. But it's another movie that I was introduced to much later in life. Eventually, I did get the VHS tape for it after my dad showed it to me. And so this is one that I was probably 10, 11 years old again before I saw it for the first time. So always been one of my favorites. I mean, it's an absolute classic. It's one of those movies that defined a generation. A lot of actors out of this movie went on to do great things. It's a movie that people are still, to this day, asking for a sequel for. I don't think we're ever going to get it. I don't think we really need it, to be honest with you. But yes, just a good old-fashioned adventure with a bunch of crazy kids, a bunch of personalities, the treasure map, and the One-Eyed Willie, and everything about this is just such a fun, nostalgic movie. It's an absolute classic. Coming in at number 33 is a movie called License to Drive, and this is when I was really on my Corey Haim kick, which I was in for most of my childhood. When you have a number of movies on this list, especially, but even things like The Lost Boys that I didn't put on this list that I've always loved. Corey Haim and Corey Feldman are people that I loved watching everything that they were in as a kid, and License to Drive was my favorite thing that they ever did outside of the Lost Boys, where you have this kid, Les, where he goes and he fails his driving exam, but he's got a hot date with Heather Graham, and so he sneaks out of the house and goes on this wild adventure without a license, and just tons of hijinks ensue. Now, I actually watched this movie a little less than a week ago, actually, when I was building this brand new chair that I'm sitting on, and I'm never somebody that gets offended by these type of things, but it is something that's funny to notice. This is one of those movies that does not age so well. So you watch it through the modern lens and you're like, oh my God. So he takes his chick out. She gets blind drunk. You got Corey Feldman in the back seat that's like undoing her shirt and taking pictures of her tits. And then they throw her in the fucking trunk so that they could go meet other women and go party for the rest of the night. She's just bouncing around inside of the trunk. So yeah, you watch it nowadays and it's like, wow, okay, that's hilarious. But it's a very funny movie. To me, like I said, the best thing that the two Coreys did outside of the Lost Boys. Coming in at number 32 is a movie that I will be shocked if any of you watching this remember. So if you know this movie, please let me know down below. And it's a movie called Flash. It used to play, I think it was like an ABC movie, and then Disney Channel picked it up. So I saw it on Disney Channel as a kid. And it's completely out of print. You can't find it anywhere. I mean, maybe you can buy a VHS of it somewhere. But for all intents and purposes, this thing is just gone. The only way that you can watch it is a very shitty copy on YouTube where somebody actually like ripped the VHS copy, and the audio is terrible. And I've definitely watched it no less than 5 times on YouTube, despite it being so terrible. But you have Lucas Black, who is this kid. He's a little farm boy. His family's kind of poor. And he loves this horse that he names Flash. So he buys the horse, but because they're not financially well off, his dad has to take this job where he goes off on this ship, this carrier, for a few months, and he's going to get a big payday. But while he's gone, his grandma, Lucas Black's grandma, passes away, and he's forced to sell the horse to basically survive while his dad is away. And the person he sells it to ends up being very abusive to horses. So he steals the horse and goes to ride the horse across country to go and meet his dad at this harbor that he's going to be stationed at in New York. And it is just such a classic feel-good movie. Whenever I just need to feel good, doesn't matter what I'm down in the dumps about, this movie puts a smile on my face. It puts absolute comfort into my veins, to the point where I probably should have put it higher. But, you know, again, I'm splitting hairs with these lists because I love all of these movies for different reasons. And it's just such a good movie. It's, you know, it's a little hokey for sure. It's definitely a 90s TV style movie, but the message of it is great. Lucas Black, I always loved him as a kid. And just the message of it is just wonderful. So it's one of those movies that those of us that know it and remember it fondly. But there's only about 8 of us on planet Earth, probably. Unless you guys in the comment section prove me wrong. But yeah, if you're interested in checking this out, it is on YouTube. I think you just search like Flash Disney Channel movie or something like that, and you could check it out. But quality's not good. Coming in at 31, an absolute classic, Karate Kid. Not a whole lot that we need to say about this. Most of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s loved this film, and now we're fans of Cobra Kai. And Cobra Kai is about to end. So yeah, Karate Kid and Karate Kid Part 3. I always loved that one too. I mean, I love the second one too, but those two are my favorite. These are movies that also played a lot on Disney Channel. Disney Channel also dominates this list, by the way. So I absolutely loved this movie. I loved the soundtrack. I loved the characters, Mr. Miyagi. I mean, everybody did the crane kick. Anytime that you were thinking you're going to get in a fight, everybody tried to do the crane. So absolute classic for a reason. We've all talked about it ad nauseum. Comes in at 31. Coming in at number 30, Can't Buy Me Love. Absolute classic of the 80s. This is one that not a whole lot of people talk about. I never hear anybody bring up this movie, but I watched it so many times as a kid. I love it, and I love the message. I love what this movie stands for. You got Patrick Dempsey. Back before he was known as McDreamy, you know, he was playing this nerdy guy. And you had, what's her name? Amanda Peterson, who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago, who was playing like this really popular cheerleader. And he has all this money and sees her in a situation where she desperately needs some money, where he gives her this money and she, in return, pretends to be his girlfriend for a week in his hopes that that will make him popular. She doesn't believe it. She says it's a waste of money. It's not going to happen, but it works. Everybody follows in line. Everybody follows in and calls this guy like super popular, and all the chicks want him. All the guys want to be friends with him. And so it's a movie that really dives into like the social norms of high school, a lot of which are still very relevant to today, or at least was still relevant when I was in high school back in the 2000s. But it dives into what it means to be yourself and what it costs if you just exist as what other people want you to be. So many things about this movie that I love. I mean, the soundtrack's great. I love the characters. There's a lot of funny stuff in here. You got a young Seth Green who's hilarious. You've got Dennis Dugan, who eventually went on to direct a number of comedies, quite a few with Adam Sandler, plays the dad in here. It's just such a great 80s movie. But above all else, I just love what it stands for. Fun fact, I actually used this movie to parent one time. When my oldest was, I think he was maybe like 12, maybe 13 or something like that. He was starting to get in trouble in school here and there for like following and getting other kids getting him into trouble. Not big trouble, but, you know, just goofing off in class. And I kept trying to tell him, like, don't be a follower. It's what my dad always taught me. He's like, don't be a follower, because following only gets you in trouble. And so I used this movie to get that point across. I sat him down, I watched it with him, and after it was over, I talked with him about it. And so, yeah, so there's going to be a number of fun stories with a lot of these, but that's my fun story for Can't Buy Me Love. It helped me parent my kids, but I love this one. Coming in at 30, Can't Buy Me Love. Number 29, another absolute classic, Stand By Me. One of the more adult, one of the darker movies on this list that really just dives into how great your friendships are as a kid. You know, one of the saddest things about this movie is the way that it kind of bookends itself with this novel that Richard Dreyfuss' character is writing, where he essentially says, you know, I never had kids like I did when I was, or never had friends like I did when I was 12, do any of us. And it really makes you look back and say, yeah, you know, you think about the kids that we played with when we were young and just how life was great and every day was an adventure. And then one day you wake up and one by one, those people start to disappear. Either they move or they go to a different class or they fall into a different crowd or you fall into a different crowd or, you know, what say you? Very rarely do people stay friends with the people that they were friends with as kids. And this is a movie that kind of dives into all of that and based off a short story by Stephen King. And there's a number of other things that go into it. They're basically going to find this dead body. So it's a more adult kids movie, but I love the characters. I love the cast. And yeah, it's one of those like bittersweet nostalgic movies that makes you think back and go, yep, you know, if I could just live one more day back in those days, that would be awesome. Coming at number 28 is a movie called House Arrest. And this is one where you have Jamie Lee Curtis, you have Kevin Pollak, you've got Christopher McDonald, Jennifer Tilly, a number of others where basically these kids get tired of their parents' shit. All their parents are either on the brink of divorce or they have a bad relationship or something's about to happen. And so they essentially lock their parents in the basement of their house and they do like group therapy and shit to try to force them to get along again. And it's a really funny movie because it gives the power to the kids, because we've all been in that situation. Maybe not all of us. Some of us had, you know, parents with very healthy relationships. You know, my parents got divorced and very, very young when I was young. So I was around for all of their shenanigans. And I know what it's like to feel like powerless in that situation. And a lot of kids do in that situation where it's like, we love each other. We're a family. Like, how could you split up? I don't get this, because kids don't see all the behind the scenes. Kids don't feel what the parents are feeling. And so I like the way that this kind of turns that on its head and it gives the power back to the kids where they force the parents back together. And it's like, you're going to fucking remember why you love each other, bitch, or you ain't getting dinner tonight. So it's a fun movie. It's goofy. It's silly as shit. I rewatched it not too long ago and it like, there's no logic in this movie whatsoever, but it's a kid's movie from the 90s. So what the fuck do you go to that movie for logic for? But it's fun. It's got fun characters. Christopher McDonald plays a great dickhead in this. He's just a belligerent asshole, like he is in most of his best roles. And Jennifer Tilly as a parent that acts like she's like 12 years old. So it's a fun one. Coming in at number 27 is a Tom Hanks classic, Big. Why doesn't Tom Hanks make movies like this anymore? Why does he only do like the Oscar type stuff? I really hate that. Like, he does make some really good movies. He gives great performances. So it's not like his career has gone downhill. But I really miss when he would do things like this in Turner and Hooch. I wish he would go back and just do like one classic feel-good comedy. And so Big is an absolute classic. I used to watch this all the time. You know, we all love the Zoltar machine. You see it pop up in, you know, pop culture and video games and shit. I'm always like, oh, Zoltar. And so you have this kid that wants to be bigger, wishes to be bigger, and turns into this, you know, 30-year-old guy. And another movie that there's an element of it that doesn't age so well, but it's hilarious to watch, where, you know, you got this guy who's essentially like this 13-year-old kid. And I mean, they never explicitly say if they have sex or not, but regardless, gets very, very intimate with a woman. And so, again, one of those old school movies that just gave no fucks about the rules and just told a really good story. It's hilarious, where he's trying to like get a job, doesn't know what a social security number is, and rises through the ranks in this company because he has the thought process of a child and he works at a toy company. So it's an absolute classic. It is on Disney Plus, but I want to say the Disney Plus version is edited a little bit. The friend of his that has kind of a trash mouth gets edited out. So I would not watch it on Disney Plus. I would watch it on something else like Amazon Prime or something like that. Really annoys me when we get edited versions of classic movies. I will literally stop the movie that I'm watching if they edit something, and I'll go get the fucking Blu-ray and put it in, because I just can't stand to watch that. Tangent. Nobody cares about that. 27. Big. Number 26. Three Ninjas Kick Back. And I am probably the only person on planet Earth that would put this one over the original. Three Ninjas Kick Back was the one that I watched the most as a kid. That was the VHS that my grandma got for me that introduced me to these movies. So I watched this a number of times before I saw the first one, and then Three Ninjas Knuckle Up, and then eventually the Mega Mountain one with Hulk Hogan, which was god awful. But Three Ninjas Kick Back has it where the grandpa that trains them goes off to Japan, and these guys are trying to rob him for this like mystical knife that he has. And so the kids go to Japan to try to save him. I've always liked the fact that they go to Japan. I always like the culture shock that they're in. And so that was always a more entertaining movie for me than the first one, which is like a silly home invasion type film. Other than that, you know, you're kind of splitting hairs with which one's the best. The first three are all fine for 90s kids. Don't age so well as adults, but always loved it. Always loved it as a kid. Number 25, Uncle Buck. This, if any movie exists to be my comfort movie, it's this. Now, I love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles just a little bit more. That is my favorite John Candy movie, but there's something about Uncle Buck that just is like the equivalent of putting a warm blanket around you as a movie. I love the character. I love the message of the movie where, you know, the mom very much judges Uncle Buck wrong, thinks that he's this sleazebag and he's a scumbag and he just doesn't care. And he ends up kind of caring even more than the parents to a degree, and actually gets through to the daughter and, you know, brings so much out of the younger kids. And it's just such a great movie, such a classic John Hughes movie. I really wish we could get more movies like this. There's something about today that's missing that John Hughes heart. And Uncle Buck is one of my absolute favorites. So yeah, another movie that we've all talked about ad nauseum. It's a classic for a reason. Coming in at number 25. Number 24, D2 Mighty Ducks. Now, all three of these movies are pretty solid. The third one pisses me off a bit because Emilio Estevez isn't in it, and they turn Charlie into a bit of a dickhead. But they're all fun. They're all nostalgic for me. But I always like the second one the best. I always like the new kids coming in from the different cities, and they become the Team USA, and there's a lot more fun to be had, and they're a bit more mature. I like the age that they're at here. It's a bit more fun than when they're the little tykes in the first one. So I've always enjoyed this one the best of the three, as well as the way that they kind of put Gordon Bombay in a situation where he starts to get a bit of an ego, starts to get a little bit Hollywood, and the kids have to bring him back down to earth. So yeah, always loved this one. It was my favorite of the Mighty Ducks movies. Coming in at number 23 for me is Heavyweights, and I was introduced to this way too late in life. I was probably like 11 or 12 when I first saw this. I always passed the VHS tape in stores and always thought that it looked fun, but for some reason never picked it up and never got a chance to see it until eventually they played it on Disney Channel one day, and I recognized Ben Stiller, who I already loved at that point from movies like Happy Gilmore and a number of others, and I was like, oh, this is funny. Okay, he's playing a little crazy guy, and I just absolutely fell in love with this movie, where it took me forever to finally see it from the start, because back in the day, you know, before we had Netflix and shit like that, when you turn the TV on, you just had to start watching something at whatever point it was if you didn't realize it was coming on. And so I saw this movie probably 7 different times at different points before I actually got to sit down and watch it start to finish. And nowadays, it's one of my favorites to revisit. My daughter loves it, so sometimes we'll just throw it on just to have something casual going on in the background. A very fun movie about these kids at fat camp. And then you have Ben Stiller, who comes in as this psycho that's trying to turn it into a weight loss infomercial, and he's like the devil. And so it's really funny and charming to me that you have his father in here too, who I love from King of Queens, as the camp owner that he basically buys the camp from. So, yeah, this one is an absolute classic. If I had been introduced to it maybe even just 3 years earlier in life, it would probably be even higher on this list. But it's one that I love. It's one that I love to revisit on Disney Plus all the time. Number 22 is The Paper Brigade, which is more often, you could find it now as Gunther and the Paper Brigade. But when I watched it as a kid, it was just called The Paper Brigade. This is a movie that also played pretty heavily on Disney Channel. And it's the same kid that is the lead in House Arrest. And basically what you have here is this kid who's just an absolute shithead. He's got no responsibility. He doesn't give any fucks about anything. And he finds himself in a situation where he's trying to woo this hot girl in the neighborhood that he just moved into. And so he buys these tickets that he has to pay these bullies back for, and he's forced to take a paper route. Only the paper route is the paper route from hell. You have dogs that attack him. You have kids that throw tomatoes and things at him. You have certain houses that dodge him for paying the bill. And so it's a movie about him kind of finding responsibility and maturing as a kid by navigating this paper route and figuring out how to maximize it to his potential. So it's a lot of fun. You've got Robert Englund in here as a crazy old guy that everybody's afraid to go talk to in the neighborhood. So it's always been nostalgic for me. This is another one that is on YouTube. You can find a pretty decent copy of it if you've never seen it before, or if you're like me and grew up with it and want to revisit it. For whatever reason, it's not on Disney Plus. You know, some of these movies, it's very odd to me. For as stacked as Disney Plus's catalog is with a bunch of nostalgic movies, there's certain ones that are just missing from it. But thank God for YouTube. It's there. Coming in at number 21, Encino Man, buddy. This is 90s in a basket. This is the 90s in a nutshell. This is Pauly Shore in a nutshell. Pauly Shore is somebody that you cannot fucking explain to somebody to save your life unless you were in the 90s. Like, he's just such a specific and distinct personality with his weasel shit and the way that he would talk. You know, it's a dialect in and of himself. Like, if Pauly Shore was in the TikTok era, all of his fucking catchphrases would be shit that our kids are saying. That's how stupid TikTok stuff happens, and it just becomes the way that kids talk now. He would own the world in this era. But Encino Man, you've got Sean Astin and Pauly Shore, who find a caveman buried in their backyard, and it's played by Brendan Fraser. And so they basically teach this caveman how to be a high school kid in hopes that he makes them popular. And it is just pure 90s nostalgia, 90s soundtrack, 90s style. Everything about it, I just absolutely love. This is one of the first VHS tapes that I actually bought with my own money. I remember that. I got some money from my grandma. We went across the street to this mall that I used to live next to, and we went right into the store with all of the movies. And I looked around at this place like a kid in a candy store and finally found Encino Man, which I had only seen scenes of on TV, and I bought it. And I watched that thing constantly. So this is one that is absolute pure 90s nostalgia for me. It still holds up today, but Pauly Shore especially, man, that's something that if you're younger than me and you've never heard of Pauly Shore, go watch Encino Man and check out this guy. He had a whole string of movies in the 90s where he was like the biggest comedy star for a quick little sneeze. Yeah, that happened. Coming at number 20, we got Tom and Huck. Now, we have had a ton of different iterations of the Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn movies, but this one was always my favorite. You got Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who was huge in the 90s for Home Improvement. You had Brad Renfro, who had a lot of really big roles too, and died tragically, I think, from like drug abuse or something. He was always a great actor. But you have these two kids that I always knew a lot of their stuff that play these two characters that are, classic characters of English literature. And you have this situation where I think they pretty much just adapt the Tom Sawyer book, and they just have Huck in there as this other side character. But what I always loved about this is how mature this movie is for a Disney film. It involves a murder where Tom Sawyer and his friends watch Injun Joe stab a guy to death. And then Injun Joe says, "You tell anybody, I'm going to kill you too." And so the whole movie's about him kind of struggling with whether or not to tell the truth. Otherwise, this innocent man that he loves is going to hang for it. And so when you have stabbings and hangings and shootings and everything like that, like, it's pretty hardcore for a Disney movie, even in the 90s. So that's certainly one of the reasons why I always loved it as a kid. I always loved some of the more mature stories out there. But yeah, this one, pure nostalgia, a really good movie that holds up. It's also on Disney Plus, so check it out. Number 19, Blank Check. You want to talk about a movie aging like fucking milk? Holy crap. This movie literally has a young kid who's like, 10 years old making out basically with a full adult chick. Oh, wow. Yeah. So you have a kid who he gets hit by this guy who just robbed a bunch of money, and he hands him a blank check for the bike that he just destroyed. And being a little smartass, this kid writes the blank check in for $1 million and goes to cash it. Well, because it's a guy that just robbed a shitload of money, he actually has $1 million in his account. So this kid gets $1 million and basically spends it the way that a kid would, where he buys this mansion, he buys all these toys, he buys a racetrack, he hires a limo driver to take him around every single day. It's a really fun, silly movie about just like how fast you'll piss away money, like a fool in his gold or soon parted. And it's a lot of fun. As a kid, I loved it because I love just the dream, the fantasy of having your own house and filling it with all this crazy shit that probably added up to way more than $1 million. But yeah, there's that element of the movie where you got this chick who works at the bank who's an undercover cop, and she keeps trying to like hook up with this kid to get the information on the guy that stole the money, and they actually go on dates. And at the end of the movie, she kisses him, and not like a kiss on the cheek, like a fucking kiss right on the lips, like at the end of a romantic comedy. And yeah, for as much as Disney loves to virtue signal to us nowadays, explain that shit, Mickey. Coming in at 18, we got Jungle to Jungle, a Tim Allen classic. I have always loved this movie, where you have a guy who is this Wall Street broker, and he goes to finalize his divorce from his wife that has been, lived in an island for the last decade, and come to find out that she had a kid. And so this guy that just finds out that he is a father to this kid that has only lived on this foreign island his entire life is forced to take him back to New York. And it's a culture clash movie where you got this kid that lives in an island now in the Big Apple, doesn't know what cars are and planes and how to use a toilet and what cereal is. And it's a lot of fun for the culture shock stuff, but I really love the movie for the father and son storyline here, where I actually get teary-eyed by the end of it, where a guy that never knew he had a son now has to figure out how to be a father, and the way that challenges both of them. This is a really sweet movie. My weakness as far as getting me choked up is father-son stuff, because I've always been so close with my dad, and this is one of those movies that always tugs on my heartstrings, especially when he goes to put him on the plane by the end of the movie. I'm getting sad talking about it right now. But yes, it's a very funny movie. Martin Short is hilarious in this one, so it's another one that's on Disney Plus. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Number 17, we have Jumanji, a Robin Williams classic, and my favorite memory of this movie is when I asked my dad to take us to the theater to go and see it. And I remember he was just bitching the entire time that we were going to this movie because he expected it to be some stupid-ass kid movie he didn't really want to see, but he was going to take me to go see it because he's a good dad. And so he was just pissing and moaning. And then we go and watch this awesome movie. And on the way out of the movie, he was like, "Man, that was awesome. That was a kick-ass movie. I can't wait till we buy that." And so I still tell that story to this day, and he'll laugh because he remembers exactly what it was like. But a great movie, man. You're talking about a absolute classic of my childhood. This video game that comes to life, where Robin Williams is, as a kid, gets sucked into this video game or this board game. I said video game. I'm talking about the rock ones. We don't need to talk about those. He gets sucked into this board game, and these kids, like 40 years later, find the game. They start playing it. Robin Williams comes out of the game as Robin Williams, and so you have these 4 people, 2 adults, 2 kids that have to finish this game. And every single move, there's all these jungle animals that come out of it. And the special effects have aged pretty well. Like, some of it's dated, but It's just such an awesome movie, such a great ride. It's action-packed, it's funny, it's sweet, it's heartfelt. Damn near a perfect movie. You know, Robin Williams had a lot of classics. This is certainly one of them. Number 16, we're starting with one of a number of movies that are Disney Channel original movies for me, and we're going to start off with Horse Sense. This is not one that I hear get mentioned very much. Like, 90s kids, we loved our DComs. And so when you start talking to 90s kids about DComs, they're passionate about their favorites. And Horse Sense is one I don't hear too many people talk about, but this is the Lawrence brothers, who have done a number of things together. You got Joey Lawrence, you got Andy Lawrence. Matt wasn't in this one. But Joey Lawrence is this rich, spoiled kid that his cousin, played by his real-life brother, Andy Lawrence, comes to stay with him for a week, and he's supposed to take him to Disneyland and show him a good time, and he just blows him off the entire week. And after his parents find out about it, they ride his ass, they send him to where Andy lives, which is on a ranch in Montana, and makes him work for the summer. And so you have another kind of culture clash, fish out of water movie where this spoiled LA entitled little bastard has to go and get dirty and get sweaty and work this ranch in Montana. And it's just a really sweet movie because you have a guy learning the lessons about the valuable things in life and learning about how to earn your keep and what's truly valuable, but also the way that he reconnects with his cousin after he realizes that they're not well off and they don't have all these things that he had. And so it's a really good movie. Eventually they did a sequel to it called Jumping Ship, which I almost put on this list, where you actually have Matt Lawrence that comes into this one as this ship captain. But it's a much more action-packed thing where they go off and they get shipwrecked on this island and there's these pirates looking for them. It's a totally different movie, but it's a really fun follow-up. So either of those movies are great, but Horse Sense I've always just loved. Something about that movie and the Montana setting and the ranch, I just love it. Coming at number 15, we got First Kid. And man, I used to love me some Sinbad. You got First Kid, you got House Guest. Oh, man. And he's really good stand-up comedy, too. It's kind of more family-oriented, but he's a funny fucking dude. But First Kid, you have Sinbad, who plays this Secret Service agent that gets stuck protecting the president's son. And the president's son is a little fucker. He's, like, constantly pranking him. He doesn't listen. He's sneaking out. And you have these two people that kind of hate each other at first that become very close, where Sinbad kind of becomes a father figure and a friend to him when he doesn't have any friends. And also he gets to connect with this kid that he sees as acting out because he doesn't actually have the ability to have a real life. He's constantly under surveillance. He's only allowed to leave under supervision. All the kids at school fuck with him because he's the president's kid. And it's just absolutely hilarious. The way that Sinbad reacts with Zachary Ty Bryan, the older brother in Home Improvement, who's the bully and tries to hook up with the science teacher. And it's just always been a fun, nostalgic one. There's a moment in the movie where Sinbad gets hit with a spitball while he's sleeping, and then later on he goes to do a spitball with a whole fucking paper towel roll that kills me every single time that I see it because the spitball is like a softball. But yeah, this is a good one. Man, I love me some Sinbad. Kazam, or is it Shazam? Shazam never happened, but First Kid did, so check it out. Number 14 is the movie that I am most surprised never got a sequel in this list, and that is Small Soldiers. This is a film that was so huge when it came out. I mean, you think about like the Toy Story, which we'll talk about here very shortly, where these line of toys are in this movie that's so popular and suddenly the toys themselves are so popular. That same thing happened with Small Soldiers, where you have the Commando Elite, you have the Gorgonites, and all those bitches were a huge toy that Christmas. And I got my Commander Chip Hazard, or Major Chip Hazard, and my Archer. I remember to this day that it was one of those years where my dad had to take me Christmas shopping because, you know, my mom wasn't around. He didn't have a babysitter. And so he took me, and it was kind of like on the honor system. Like, we're going to get you some Christmas presents. It's the only time I have to get it. So just, you know, you'll know about some of them. Just be patient. You'll get them on Christmas. And I saw that he had got me the Major Chip Hazard and the Archer. And there's a scene in the movie where they punch their way out of the box. And Dennis Leary's like, "Whoa, can they really do that?" And so I remember thinking when my dad bought them, like, okay, I got to remember what the shape of these boxes are, because when I go to unwrap them, I want to punch out of the wrapper. And we used to have this VHS tape every single Christmas for maybe like 4 or 5 years. My dad would set up the camcorder in the corner of the room and film the whole family opening up their presents. And as a kid, I used to rewatch these tapes all the time. It's the most boring shit in the world, but I don't know. I used to love watching them. And I remember there's a spot in this old tape where you see me off in the corner start to open up Archer, and I'm like, and you see like the light bulb moment where I remembered this is the box. And so I tear a little hole in the back, and there was a little push button where they would like, their arm would do this. And I kept doing that, trying to get them to break out of the wrapper. So that VHS tape is somewhere. But anyway, the movie. Such a fun movie. You have these toys that get these military chips put into them that makes them super smart, and they're rivals. And so this whole neighborhood basically becomes a war zone between these soldier toys and these monster toys, and the monsters are the good guys. And it's just a really fun one. You got Kirsten Dunst in here. You have Phil Hartman, rest in peace. A number of others, great soundtrack. But this is one that I remember everybody my age seeing this, loving it. It was huge. The toys were huge. There was video games for it. The video game fucking sucked. I had it on PS1, but there was a ton of stuff as far as marketing for this movie. And they never made another one. It was really surprising. Like, and maybe they wasn't as financially successful as I'm remembering, but I remember this movie being huge, and we've only ever had the one. Number 13, Major Payne. Not only is Major Payne an absolute nostalgic classic, it's kind of been a guide for how I parent my kids. I call all of my kids turds because of this movie. I'm like, shut up, turd. And so this is one that I was introduced to a bit late in life, but it was so influential and it was such a favorite of mine that it rose up quite a bit on this list. I was actually staying with my grandpa in either Tennessee or Kentucky. He lived way out in the country. He had horses and stuff, and he had DirecTV, which we did not have. And so I remember looking at all these different movie channels, and I got introduced to a ton of movies that summer. I stayed with him for like 2 weeks, and one of them was Major Payne, and I watched it constantly and eventually got the VHS tape whenever I went back home to Ohio at the time. And this has Damon Wayans, where he is a very hard-ass soldier, and he's forced to take a position as this commander of these private school kids that are in like an ROTC program. And he fucks these kids up. He runs them like the Marines. And so they're all trying to push back at him. They're all trying to rebel against him, and he just keeps outsmarting them and keeps fucking them up left and right. It's absolutely hilarious. But another one of those movies where, as you could probably predict, he gets softened by the kids and he kind of makes them into men. And a fun fact for a lot of you that follow me for my regular content, this movie was actually directed by Nick Castle. Yeah, that Nick Castle directed this movie. So a lot of you Halloween fuckers that have never seen this movie, I guarantee you this has been added to your cart and your watch list, hasn't it? This is an absolute classic to me. Damon Wayans is hilarious. This is my favorite role that he ever had. So yeah, Major Payne is up here high. 13. Number 12, we got Rookie of the Year, another movie that was just one that I wore the VHS tape out. And this was directed by Daniel Stern, which is interesting, where you have this kid who is a big fan of the Cubs. He breaks his arm, and over the summer, it heals up. And whenever he gets his cast off, his tendons have healed too tight. So whenever he goes to pitch a ball, his arm like snaps forward. So he's able to throw a fastball faster than anybody in the major leagues. And so the Cubs actually like scout him and add him onto the team. So it's about this kid playing with a bunch of adults. And it's just a really fun movie because you have this relationship with him and his mom where the mom's boyfriend's an asshole and his idol is Gary Busey, who is the pitcher that he kind of took over for. So there's a bit of a father angle in there, a father figure angle. It's fun because you see this kid mature as he's trying to find his way amongst a bunch of adults, and he kind of softens the team a little bit, and there's baseball politics and everything inside of it. It's just a really fun movie. So this is another one that just screams 90s nostalgia to me. Number 11, we're going back to the Disney Channel, and we got Smart House. I've always loved this movie. And so you have this kid that wins this house that is essentially like if Alexa controlled everything in your house. Like she can make you meals, she does all the alarms, she can project things on the wall, she can send out things with your email, which I'm sure we're, no less than 20 years away from everybody having a house like this. But it was pretty badass for the time, the way that they realized it with CGI and green screens and everything. And this house starts to learn at such a rapid rate that she actually becomes maternal and goes a little too far, where she's like overprotective of these kids and overreaching. And the house, the AI that runs the house is voiced by Katie Seagal. And I met Katie Seagal earlier this year at MegaCon, and she's got a ton of Sons of Anarchy shit out, and Married with Children. She didn't have any Smart House stuff up. So I got her to sign a picture for Gemma for Sons of Anarchy. And I told her I was a huge fan of the show. I said, but you are royalty in my house for playing Pat. And, she seemed like one of those people that maybe I was caught her later in the day, or maybe she's just not so much into the con thing. But, she was very nice, but you could tell she wasn't very talkative. So I wish that would have gotten more of a laugh out of her, but nonetheless, it was a fun moment for me. And then I had Adam from Adam Does Movies with me, and he's like, I can't fucking believe you told her that. And I was like, you're damn right I told her that. Pat for life, baby. Coming at number 10, we have Toy Story. This movie was monumental when it came out. This was the first computer-generated animated film. Its legacy speaks for itself. There's 4 of these things, about to be a 5th one. But the first one was always my favorite. And I remember just how huge this movie was. And just like with Small Soldiers, everybody wanted those toys. So I had a Buzz Lightyear eventually. I had the one that was glow in the dark. And that was the toy that Christmas. And this is just such a great movie that still holds up today. Like, the animation's not as good as current Pixar, obviously, but it's just a really fun classic story of what happens when you leave the room. What do your toys do? And so you had this toy, Woody, that is jealous of this new big badass toy that's Andy's new favorite toy, and they get in a fight, end up having to go on this big adventure to get back to the house. It's an absolute classic. What else is there to say about Toy Story? It's one of the best. And what's so nostalgic about this is not just the movie, but also that toy and the Sega Genesis video game that I played and could never fucking beat, man. There were so many games as a kid that I have these memories of just trying to dive into it and trying to put a lot of time and effort into it. And, back in the day, if you lost a certain amount of times, you have to start back at the beginning. And so many times I would get to Pizza Planet and I would die at Pizza Planet, or I think I got to Sid's house. I think Sid's house was the furthest I ever made it. And then I would die and go back to the beginning. And there was a number of video games like that where I'm just like, one day, you son of a bitch, one day when they ported it over to PS5 and I could save, I'll finally defeat you. Coming in at number 9 is a movie called Lucas, which is one of my ultimate all-time comfort films. And this starred Corey Haim. You had Winona Ryder. You had Cary Green, who all of us knew from the Goonies. You have Charlie Sheen, a number of other people that you'll recognize. And you basically have Corey Haim as this kid who's a bit of an advanced student, and he's in high school, and he just gets bullied constantly. And he basically falls in love with this girl who is the new girl in school. And she falls in love with Charlie Sheen, who's like the star quarterback. And Lucas and Charlie Sheen are best friends. So just kind of, it's a more dramatic kids movie than most on here, where it really dives into some of the more real moments of high school and growing up and adolescence. And so it's always just really hit for me, where it speaks on a lot of things that all of us have encountered at least at one point or another. Having feelings for somebody that doesn't return them, or somebody telling you that they have feelings for you and you can't return them, but you don't want to lose the friendship. You don't want to insult them. You don't want to hurt them, but you got to be honest. So it's just a movie that's very raw. Now, there's a little bit of a stain on this because Corey Feldman a number of years ago made an accusation that something very bad happened between Charlie Sheen and Corey Haim. I don't know if that actually happened or not. That would be pretty horrific if it did. But nonetheless, that's something that here in recent years is kind of hard to put in the back of your head when you watch this movie. But nonetheless, I watched it for decades before that happened. And, I don't know if it's ever possible to prove that. But yeah, that aside, I've always loved this movie. It always brings me a lot of comfort. I saw this one on Disney Channel for the first time when I was watching something, and I remember they said, coming up next is Lucas starring Corey Haim. And I was like, Corey Haim? And so I watched it, and there's something about the music in this movie. To this day, I can hum it. Dun, 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 dun. Something about the music, it just makes me smile. It just makes me feel good. It really reminds me of like that simpler time of just being able to chill in my room and watch this movie on a Friday night, getting ready for the weekend. And yeah, it brings me comfort. Coming in at number 8, we're going back to the DComs, and really this one competes and switches places with the one that I have yet to talk about as my favorite DCOM of all time. But for right now, I'm going to throw it in here. Number 8 is Brink. Brink was a huge movie for me. This was Eric Von Detten, who was a massive Disney star at the time, was in a lot of different movies and TV shows and stuff like that. And it's a movie about these kids in California that skate for the fun of it. And then you have these other kids that they go to high school with who are this sponsored team who are only in it for the money and the publicity and the fame. And it's about those two ideologies clashing, where those two groups are constantly like pranking each other and punking each other and everything like that. And so you have a situation where Brink, who is the lead character, needs money because his dad is laid off. And so he becomes a sponsored skater to try to help his family, but it betrays everything that he stands for. And he starts to like it. So it's such an awesome movie. There's really great, intense sequences in here with the skating and the stunt work. It's a really good story, good characters. The soundtrack is really fun. And it's just one of the more exhilarating DCOM movies. So if you grew up in the 90s, you absolutely know this movie. Whether or not you love it as much as me, we can debate, but Brink has always been up there for me. It's one of my absolute favorites. Coming at number 7 is The Sandlot. The Sandlot was childhood. This is one that is just a very, very influential movie for a lot of people, where you got this kid, he moves to this town, and all these local kids play baseball all day long, every day at this Sandlot, and he kind of weasels his way into this group of friends. And it's a movie that kind of teaches you about life and teaches you about growing up. It's a coming of age type movie where eventually he has this baseball that his stepdad, played by Dennis Leary, has that's signed by Babe Ruth. Only this kid doesn't know who the fuck Babe Ruth is. Like, he's trying to be friends with these kids, but he doesn't know shit about baseball. And so they need a baseball to play with, so he steals his dad's signed Babe Ruth baseball, and they accidentally knock it over this fence, where every ball that goes over this fence, they never get it back because there's this killer dog that goes behind the fence that lives there called the Beast. And so the back half of the movie is all about them trying to get this prized baseball back that's signed by, at the time, the greatest baseball player that ever lived, from this demonic dog. And, just telling you about like neighborhood tall tales and like how it's never true. And you got James Earl Jones in here in a great role by the end of it. So we all know The Sandlot. We all love The Sandlot. It's one that I've been able to introduce my kids to, and they all love it too. So The Sandlot, absolute classic of the 90s. Number 6, I'm going to have to cheat because I can never watch one of these movies without the other. I'm going to have Home Alone 1 and Home Alone 2 Lost in New York in here. It's a bit of a hot take, but I've always preferred the second one. I love them both. They're both like 5 out of 5 movies to me, but if I had to pick one, I always prefer the second one just a little bit. But yeah, we all know Home Alone. You got Macaulay Culkin, who was, maybe to this day still is the greatest child actor of all time. And he's a little shithead, and his parents accidentally leave him home alone while they go on vacation. And so he has to figure out shit on his own. All the while, you have the Wet Bandits, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern, getting ready to rob his house. And then you take it to New York in the second one, which is very far-fetched and ridiculous, but such a fun movie where the traps have ramped themselves up. The comedy ramps itself up. So both of these are just absolute pure classics. Not only Christmas classics, so I rewatch them at least once a year, but just nostalgic movies of the 90s. Again, simpler time, Macaulay Culkin movies. And the slapstick comedy is next to none. Aside from the Three Stooges, I don't know if anybody does it better than the Wet Bandits. So we all know these movies. I don't have to say anything else about them. They're up here for a reason. They're awesome. Coming in at number 5 is the only horror movie I have on here, and it's a movie called Little Monsters. If you have never seen this before, this is one of the more dark and fucked up kids movies that you have ever seen. Like, it's this and All Dogs Go to Heaven that kind of toe that line of like, this is for kids? Are you sure? Basically, you have the Savage brothers here, Fred Savage and Ben Savage, and Ben Savage is afraid of this monster that lives under his bed, and so Fred Savage eventually traps this monster, played by Howie Mandel, one of the only movie roles I know him from, and becomes best friends with this monster. And the monster takes him down into the monster world and kind of indoctrinates him in, and they party all night long. But the longer that he stays in the monster world, the more that he starts to become a monster. And eventually the leaders of the monster world wants the kids for themselves. So it's a very dark movie. Like, it's got moments that are actually pretty terrifying, but I've always loved it. I love the soundtrack. Howie Mandel is basically on cocaine this entire movie. His character is so high energy that if you didn't grow up with this movie, he'll probably annoy the shit out of you. But Fred Savage and Ben Savage are great. This is just one I've always loved. You know, these are iconic movies for me that not a whole lot of people talk about, but this was one that it's a good gateway horror movie. If you want to try to introduce your kids to horror, this is one that I think is a good one to watch, where it's a little scary, it's a little dark, there's some language in here. Like, it's a kid's movie, but it's not. But it's a good little gateway. So check that one out and show all the kiddies. Coming at number 4 is a movie that I never realized that a lot of people did not like until I joined the internet. And I was so insulted and mortified, I wanted to about face and never look at the internet again. And that is Steven Spielberg's Hook. Not a movie that people mention very often when they're talking about Steven Spielberg's best movies, but it has always been in my top 5. This is a movie that was so important to me as a kid, and I get so much joy and so much happiness every single time that I revisit as an adult. You got Robin Williams in here as a guy that is very, he's focused on work. He doesn't spend a lot of time with his kids or his family, and then one day his kids get kidnapped by Captain Hook. And so he goes to Neverland, and it's all a ruse where they're trying to draw Robin Williams in because they think that he's Peter Pan, which he does not remember being. And so the whole movie is about him kind of rediscovering his inner child, rediscovering his love for his kids and his family, and of course, rediscovering his past as Peter Pan. And it is just such an absolutely magical movie to me. I cannot imagine why anybody would dislike this. And it's always brought up as one of Steven Spielberg's weakest movies. Now, when you got a filmography like Steven Spielberg, of course, there's going to be movies that people have higher than it that are more like important. But to call this a bad movie is just like a sin to me. I think that it is just heartwarming. I think that the special effects with the flying and the shadows and the sword fight and everything is great. The characters are wonderful. There's so many different scenes and lines that I will always remember. Bang-a-rang and Rufio, and the scene where they're eating imaginary food and he just doesn't fucking get it. He's like, what the hell are we doing? Where's the real food, bitch? I love this movie so much, and it's one that I've introduced my kids to, and I was so elated that they loved it the way that I did. I would have been heartbroken if they're like, dude, this sucks. What are you talking about, Dad? So yeah, Hook is one that, I don't know, man. It touches the heartstrings and pulls on them very hard for me, because I love this movie so much. So, subjectivity be damned. If you're one of those people that hates Hook, I respect your opinion, but we can't be friends. Coming at number 3 is a movie that most days of the week I say is my favorite Disney Channel original movie of all time, and that is Johnny Tsunami. For somebody that doesn't really love sports, I love sports movies. And Johnny Tsunami is a surfing and snowboarding movie where you got this kid that grew up in Hawaii. He's an accomplished surfer. His dad's an absolute dick. And his parents move him to Vermont, I think, where he goes from, the sunny beaches of Hawaii to the snowy mountains of the East Coast of the United States. And so it's a culture clash, fish out of water movie where he is forced to try to fit in, to get along with these kids he has nothing in common with. And he finally does that by becoming friends with this ragtag group of snowboarders. And it even creates this rivalry where this kid who's bullying him at school is like the proper snobby, preppy kid that likes to do the skiing. And the snowboarder kids are like the ragtag group. They're the rejects. And so he kind of refines and rediscovers his love of surfing and, his passion, his free will, and his wild personality through snowboarding. And so it's just a really fun movie that's got great sports sequences and the stunt work and everything that's going on. And I just love the central friendship where you have Johnny and you have this kid named Sam, who's the first person he becomes friends with in Vermont, who is played by Lee Thompson Young, who unfortunately passed away. We'll just say that. And he was somebody that was in a lot of Disney Channel stuff back in my day, where he was Jet Jackson, a few other things. And so I just love their central friendship, where it's just one of those good old-fashioned, innocent kid friendships where two people connect and they just have fun and they just love each other for it. And I also love the grandpa. I love Johnny Tsunami himself, who's played by Shang Tsung from the Mortal Kombat movie. And what cracks me up is every time I watch this movie, I can't help but laugh. He calls his grandson Porno. I'm sure it's pronounced like Pono or something like that, but the way that he pronounces it in the movie is like, hey, Porno. And so it just cracks me up that that's his nickname for his little tyke is fucking Porno. But yeah, I've always loved this movie. They eventually did do a sequel to it. I think it was called Johnny Capahala Back on Board or something like that. It sucks. It's not very good. And so it's always a shame where you have a movie that you loved and then they finally do a sequel to it, which is rare in Disney Channel movies, except for, High School Musical. And then they just don't deliver. So yeah, Johnny Tsunami, always loved it. Please, by all means, check out Porno and his adventures on Disney+. Coming at number 2, I had to cheat again because I just cannot separate these movies. You have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. To be honest, I have always very slightly preferred the second one, which is a bit of a hot take. Most people like the first one because it's more mature, it's darker, it's different. And the second one's a little more goofy, more in line with the cartoon. But as a kid, I liked that more. I liked the humor. I liked the goofiness. I liked the soundtrack. I liked Kino and Tokar and Razor at the end of it. I think I'm pronouncing them right. But nonetheless, I always loved both of these movies. They might as well be tied for me, but always preferred the second one just a little bit. But the first one's very unique in that it kind of holds on to the tone of the comic book, where it's a little darker and more mature and more adult. So again, relics of a forgotten time where kids and family movies actually had some edge to them. And I remember like yesterday, another like just memory unlocked where I would watch these movies. And I remember the Pizza Hut commercials and the Pepsi commercials that would play before them on the VHS tapes. So that's always a wild thing to tell people that didn't grow up with VHS tapes, is you would remember the previews and the commercials that would play before them, because unless you fast forwarded them, you would see them every single time that you watched these movies. So they were like a part of the movie for you. But coming in at number 1, the movie that, despite all the amazing films that I've already talked about on this list, this is the one that absolutely just buckets of 90s nostalgia for me. And that is Disney's greatest animated film of all time, undisputed, a Goofy movie. Don't even argue with me. A Goofy movie is God. I love this movie so much. Everything about it. Like, it just brings me so much joy and happiness. So much as a kid, so much as an adult. And it's just got everything that I love in it. It's got really great music. To this day, if you play Eye to Eye, or I see somebody doing a dance video on TikTok, or, a fucking punk rock band does a cover of it, that is my shit. I love the music in this movie, and as I've said numerous times in this video, I'm a sucker for father-son stories, and this is one of the greatest ones, where you have Goofy, single dad. They never say anything about what happens to the mom, but single dad. Max is this kid that's on that, like, on the cusp of really wanting all of his independence, not wanting to hang out or even be acknowledged by his dad. And they have to go on this road trip vacation across the country that brings them both together, where Goofy realizes that his son's not a little kid anymore, and he has to kind of let go of him a little bit and embrace the more mature things that he's going for. And Max realizes how much his dad loves him more than anything else and just wants what's best for him. And just talking about that gets me fucking choked up. God, I'm a pussy. But the journey that those characters go through in this movie is just, it's absolutely bar none one of my favorites of all time for an animated film. It's got so many crazy hijinks with Bigfoot and a number of other crazy things. It's genuinely funny. It's basically a musical, so even without the awesome Powerline music in here, you have a bunch of others that I can sing every single word to without rehearsal right now if you paid me to. If you put a gun to my head and said, recite every single word of music from a Goofy movie or you're fucking dead, I'm living till tomorrow, bitch. So this is one that, you know, it's even such a core memory of mine that just like what I was talking about with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I remember the VHS tape of this movie. I remember putting it in, and you would open to this music video called Dr. Looney's Remedy.
Whoa, whoa, Dr. Looney, will you fix him up?
It's like a 3-minute song that was, again, a part of the experience when you would watch a Goofy movie. And me and my cousin would do the little dance and stuff, and then try to do the dance for Eye to Eye and could never fucking do it. And this is also one where there's a really funny story here that's an absolute tangent, but I'm going to tell it. This movie is responsible for me becoming a massive Back to the Future fan. So we all remember, or you know, maybe some of us don't, maybe some of us were more mentally stable, but we all maybe remember those games you would play as a kid with your brother or your cousin or a friend where you would fight over your favorite character. You know, I'm the Red Ranger. I'm the Red Ranger. And so me and my cousin, who was like 6 months younger than me, would spend most of our time outside of school at our grandma's house during the summer, especially. And so at one point after a Goofy movie was huge and we saw it, we would fight over who was Powerline. And I was always a hard ass. So eventually I won and he conceded. He's like, okay, whatever, you're Powerline. And so I remember one day that I walked back into our playroom at the back of my grandma's house and my cousin was jumping on the bed. And he's going, go, Johnny, go, 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 Johnny, go. And I remember going through the doorway and giving him this death glare and going, is that a Powerline song? And he goes, no. It's from this movie Back to the Future. And so I went home that night. This is how much of a psycho I was. I went home that night, went to my dad's VHS cabinet, combed through it to see if he had this movie, found this videotape that had Back to the Future written on it, went into my room and watched that entire fucking movie for the first time just so I could potentially catch my cousin in a lie and go kick his ass the next day because he dared to sing a Powerline song. I'm Powerline, motherfucker. And so, yeah, this movie inadvertently introduced me to Back to the Future. It's a very funny story. I don't even know if he remembers that if I told him. But yes, look, that tangent story aside, a Goofy movie I just absolutely love. That is the movie that, like, I would buy shirts. I'd get a fucking Powerline tattoo, honestly. Don't dare me. I'll do it. So I love it so much. It's my number one as far as movies from my childhood that I absolutely just hold dear, that I hold in my heart. A Goofy movie for life. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a video up here of my top 100 movies of all time. Certainly a video that needs to be updated at some point, but if you like these nostalgia bait videos, check that one out. And be sure to check out Patreon down in the video description below. I appreciate your consideration for that. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.